All right. All right. That was beautiful. I feel really honored. I wish you could just keep going on with that, and I could hang out there in the back. Yeah, exactly. You guys, this is rad to be here, and this is my second year speaking at the Travel Goods Show. And I just want to say that it is, for me, it's a passion to tell stories. It's a part of my DNA. It's really a big part of who I am and what brought me to photography. And I think that what's challenging is trying to articulate days and hours and years of information into like a 45-minute presentation. So bear with me while I skim over the surface a little bit of a few very important things. But I want to just start with a quick story. I was 22 years old, and I was sitting in a jail cell in Russia. How I got there is what I want to talk about. And it was interesting because I remember vividly the moment when I kind of realized, like, oh, this is what I want to do with my career, and this is what I want to do with my life. I want to tell stories about surfing in the cold, remote, and often challenging parts of the world to access. And it was this passion that I set my sights on that led me to Vladivostok, Russia. Now, Vladivostok, Russia sits inside the Sea of Japan. It's a very remote part of Russia and a place where often visitors don't go. And so when I was planning this trip, when I was preparing this whole expedition, going there for the magazine article, getting our visas dialed, inviting the journalist, inviting the surfers, because this was my career path early on. It was shooting surfing for magazines and traveling kind of all over the world. And there was a time prior to me honing in on what I really cared about, what I really loved, where we were just going to places that felt like we were kind of selling the idea of adventure, but there was often a high-rise hotel or great Wi-Fi or fine dining or, Mai Tais on the beach, and that's great. Nothing wrong with that. But for me, I was looking for places that asked a little bit more of me. I was looking for experiences that asked a little bit more of me. And as a photographer, when you want to be challenged to tell a story, a deep and meaningful one, the goal at the end of the day is that you should leave with that story. It should be yours, right? You are the author of that story. And so there I was, 22 years old, sitting inside a jail cell in Russia. And I remember maybe 7-8 hours earlier, before I had gotten the pat down and fully interrogated, I walked into this customs box and I gave my passport to this woman behind the desk. And I'll tell you one thing, it doesn't take a genius, nor does it take somebody fluent in Russian to understand non-verbally, her look and what it meant, which is that there's a problem. And I remember scanning down and looking and her pointing at this entry date on my visa, and it was the wrong date by 48 hours. For some reason, everybody else on my trip, everybody else in my crew, so to say, they got through, no problem. One after another after another. And you know what? I had applied for all of our visas together. Now, I don't want to start this off by telling you a scary story in the hopes that nobody goes back to these places, because I'll tell you what, I've been back many, many times. It's an incredible place. But this particular experience and what went wrong was probably one of the most formidable experiences in my early career. And I remember sitting there in this kind of holding cell, basically because I couldn't get a flight out that day. They were going to deport me, but I had to wait 24 hours and get deported in the morning. Something great to look forward to, right? And so after kind of going through this whole interrogation process, I'm sitting there and I'm in this little cell, and all I could think about was who I could point the finger at. I made 3 phone calls. I called my wife to tell her that I was okay. I called my mom to tell her that I was okay. And then I called Verizon to tell them that I was okay and that I really didn't want them to shut off my phone bill because I had to try and call the U.S. Embassy. And oftentimes back in the day, 20 years ago or so, if you had crazy amounts of phone calls, they would just cut off the line, right? And I knew it was going to be like a $5,000 bill or something ludicrous. So anyway, they helped me out. Shout out to Verizon for what it's worth at the time. And it was a wild thing because I remember trying to figure out, like, how do I get out of this situation? And there was nothing to do. The only thing that they told me is if they don't feed you, then that's considered cruel and unusual punishment. We can probably get you out. So anyway, it was a wild experience. And I remember sitting there just thinking through kind of every iteration of how this could have gone differently, every iteration of what happened or what went wrong or what I could have done to make this situation better or worse, or who I could blame, really. And I remember the next day getting deported, went to Korea, spent the day at the airport in a day spa, came back to Vladivostok the next day. And that feeling of walking back up through customs, putting my passport back up in front of this lady, kind of, giving those puppy dog eyes as best I could, being like, please let me in, because I wasn't sure if they were like, no, you're banned. Like, you're not coming back at all. I had no idea. And I think that when you kind of give the context that when this is your career, you've told your editors, you've begged them to let you go here, you've promised the delivery of this story, this trip, something exciting, something different, it puts a lot more on the line than just going there and being shut down because, things didn't work out. And it took me probably weeks, I would say almost months, to really try to consider and articulate like what went wrong in the situation, because, we travel in the hopes that we become a better person. You travel in the hopes that just simply by the experience of getting on a plane that you will be changed somehow, that magically by clicking the purchase button on the flight and getting on the flight and going there and coming back, you're going to be different, better. Who knows, right? But the problem is that experience of actually letting travel change you, it happens in the process before you leave your front door. This happens way earlier. It's the idea that you're going to research, you're going to understand, you're maybe going to look twice at your visa entry date and make sure that you didn't make a mistake, because really there was no one to blame but myself. And it took a minute, there's a lot of ego when you're that age, and there's a lot of excitement when you feel like you've honed in on what you love or what you care about in photography or in storytelling. So to be there and to kind of realize that like there was nobody to blame but myself, it's a painful lesson. It's a painful lesson to learn. And I will say that for me at least, I think that any moment where in an instant your rights are kind of stripped from you, it's a humbling thing. And you really take a moment to kind of reflect on what that means. And at that age, I couldn't think of a better experience for me to have, to come out unscathed, to have time to reflect. It really gave me this pause to think that we live in a time where stories are expected to be instant. Stories are expected to be delivered instantly, when really it takes reflection, time, energy to process those. And that's what I want to talk about today. I really want to talk about what it means to actually embody a story, to learn from it. How do we do it? What are the tools that we use? One of the things that I've always appreciated was the fact that any person that has a camera in their pocket, any person who considers themselves or aspires to be a documentarian of any kind, any person that travels in the modern day, they're a photographer. If you have an iPhone in your hand, if you have a camera that can shoot basically any kind of resolution, you are a documentarian. So what does that mean, and what does that look like, and how do we actually encompass going to places with the intent of telling a slightly deeper, more meaningful story? Well, I want to dive into maybe some of the actual logistics of what that looks like. So for me, one of the most important things, and again, I know that this, conversation and who this conversation reaches, it's going to be to a different variety of users. We've got brands, we've got the creators, we've got people who are just the consumers, but kind of talking more holistically to the group, I just want to consider some of these key principles. Nowadays, where we consume media, it's often on a 2-inch by 2-inch screen. You're competing with people's attention span that's based upon the length of their thumb stroke. Now, I don't want to diminish photography, storytelling, blood, sweat, and tears, hard-fought experiences just to this action. But the truth is, you are competing with that. That's the attention span that you're working with. So how do we make people pause, reflect? How do we know which kinds of media might be good for different types of use cases, right? What I've found is that oftentimes we're so focused on some of these maybe, a little bit tired and a little bit dated old recipes for photography, right? Leading lines and rule of thirds and yada, 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 and all of that is relevant. But at the end of the day, what you're really trying to do is create depth. You want to take an image from feeling one-dimensional to feeling three-dimensional. And how do we do that? Well, this image right here in the photograph that you're seeing, it's interesting because there's something really subtle that oftentimes people don't pick up on. A real seasoned photographer is looking for that way of creating depth. Now, bear with me here because the gentleman in the back, I don't know if he can see me very well, but it's really awkward if I speak this low, right? Why? Because I just see you. So what happens when you elevate your perspective? What am I doing? When I change my point of view, not here, but here, what am I doing? I'm looking over my subject, and therefore my image has done what? It's gone from a one-dimensional plane to a three-dimensional plane, because I'm seeing where they're going. I'm overhead. And why do speakers talk on a stage? What's the point? Is it for me to lord over everybody? No, it's because I want to see all of your faces. That's the point, right? So when we're thinking about photographs, what is the goal? The goal is to not just put your subject in a singular plane of view. You want to actually feel like you are somehow an observer to this person's experience. Kuril Islands in Russia. Again, I've gone back to Russia many times. It's beautiful, especially the Far East. This experience was wild. One of the most rarely visited islands in the world, the Kuril chain, right? It's up in the Ring of Fire, right? Connects Japan to Russia. And walking around this place, you're trying to embody, like, what's it like to be there? How do I emit that feeling, right? Through images. Well, three-dimensionality, which is a funny thing to say and a funny thing to even think about, is key. What else are you looking for? Well, anonymity. Why anonymity? What does that even mean? I don't know why you're traveling or what you're doing. I don't know if you're going with a friend or your kids or you're going for an assignment or you're going for a brand, what have you. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, if you're trying to create images that speak more to the masses or that speak more to a large volume of people who might want to be inspired by what you're seeing, they need to insert themselves into that frame. Creating a sense of anonymity is often done by having a subject, looking for that slide, that is slightly unrecognizable. A subject that doesn't say, I'm from 2014, look at my logos, or look at my face, this is my nationality, this is my gender, this is my this. You want an image that in some way allows the viewer to feel like they could see themselves there. That's what sells that experience. That's what also allows people to have a little sense of wanderlust as you're telling them the story, or as you're sharing the story. Now, this is one of my favorite ideas, is like creating this idea of anonymity, even when maybe you know who the subject is. When you pair that with a strong silhouette, you're often given a recipe for what I call kind of the perfect frame, right? Or the perfect image. Now, why a silhouette? What does that even mean? I'm not sure I know the screens are a little dark here, but hopefully you can get a gauge on kind of what I'm showing here, which is this is a climber in Mallorca, deep water soloing. It's one of the main attractions for Mallorca. It's why a lot of people go there, because it's some of the most exceptional deep water soloing in the world, meaning that you can go there and you can climb on these beautiful sea cliffs and then just drop into the 70-degree water. So why would an image like this be more relatable than if I was flipped around 180 degrees? Because if I was on the other side of him, what would I be seeing? I'd be seeing all the details from the sun. Everything would be front lit. Everything would feel very much, in your face. When we shoot silhouettes, we simplify the image. And by simplifying the image, you simplify the message. It's why black and white photography is so powerful. It's why creating images with a strong sense of anonymity or a silhouette is helpful for the viewer to not get lost in the details. Now, I'm talking a lot about the viewer, right? And again, I don't want to assume to know why you're shooting images. For me, I'm shooting it for the person that's going to look at it. The person that's going to open this thing or look at Instagram or open a book or buy a print or a brand that might buy it. Now, from a perspective of shooting for brands, one of the most important things is knowing that what they're going to often want is a highly relatable image in terms of who that subject is. And the easiest way to do that is to kind of not reveal who it is. Create some sense of mystery. That mystery, that mystique, is what draws people in. And for me, I'm really often trying to always think about the fact that if I'm shooting at this perspective, this 5'9" perspective right here, I need to shift that. I need to change that. One of the ways in which I love to do that, that's very simple, is shooting on a camera with a screen that pops out. As silly as that sounds. Why? Because if I'm rolling up to something where I could all of a sudden drop my camera down to the ground and not have to lay down, I can look at my screen. It can be articulated upwards, and all of a sudden I have this really unique perspective. Or I just gained like 3 feet of height and I can put the camera over me and shoot over my subject. So simple, tiny things. Most of us, what we have is we have a Ferrari in our pocket, but we're driving it as a Volkswagen. And what I mean by that is that the best camera, it's not the one you have with you, because often for me, the one I have with me is at the bottom of my bag. And I'm too impatient to stop every time I see something beautiful and dig it out. So what do I reach for? What do I grab? I grab a point and shoot, or I grab the phone that's in my pocket. Is this not a viable, powerful storytelling tool? Absolutely is. It absolutely is. And this is why I'm a big advocate that everybody can tell a meaningful story. And most of these images, obviously the photographs that took a lot of time and energy to plan and orchestrate and dial in and everything, I have a replica on my phone. I'm always using it as a tool to scout, a tool to reference, right? Is there at the end of the day any large significant difference between what you could maybe shoot on the phone in most of these situations and not? No, it's really about what you want to do to reproduce it. Do you need it to be big? Do you need to print large, right? For your own personal memory, this tool is incredible. And the better that you learn how to use it, the better that you learn how to unleash all its power, shooting in RAW, post-processing, learning how to, change your depth of field, the better. Now, this isn't a conversation around, iPhone photography or anything like that, but I want people to understand that at the end of the day, you have the tool. So the question really then is why? Why do we tell meaningful stories? Why do we desire to do so? And maybe what is the process of learning how to do it a little bit better? I oftentimes tell people that I think one of the very best things we can do as creatives or photographers, anybody that shoots images from their trips, is to put together a book. And why is that? And what do I mean by that? Do I mean you need to reach out to a publisher and get your book deal and do that? No. What I mean is that when you start to pull your images from that experience, you did an amazing 10-day trip to Cuba and you shot all these photographs. When you start to be your own editor, when you start to lay things out, and I'm just talking about a book online, maybe a blurb or this or that, something you can play with to design. What it does is it informs you as to all the moments that you might have missed. Because all of a sudden when you're laying out this photograph as a spread, and then this next photograph is a little inset image, and then you need a vertical, you start to think about things really differently. It was probably one of the most educational experience when I early in my career interned at a magazine, Transworld Surf, probably 18, 19 years ago, seeing the process of them laying out the magazine, seeing the images that complement each other, seeing how oftentimes a photograph with a lot of negative space, a photograph that felt like there could be text above. Why is this relevant? Because when we're shooting for brands, especially, what they need is options. If you walk away with just one image of that scene and they say, ooh, what we really want is like something that could be a banner ad, so it needs to be long and skinny and panoramic. Oh, what we need is this to be able to crop vertically. Did you shoot any more options for us? So when I'm shooting, I'm always thinking about what are my options? What is my wide, medium, tight? I understand sometimes that moment is fleeting. You can't always document it. It's moving. But when you have the chance, maybe to shoot that street vendor in Marrakesh or to shoot that portrait, and you can get multiple variations, that's what I'm looking for. I want to create as many variations as possible, right? Why? Because when you're laying out that book, just for practice, just for fun, you learn very quickly that there's probably moments you missed, or what might have really helped tell this story. A couple portraits, a couple photos of the food you ate, a couple little behind the scenes moments. It doesn't always have to be the big, beautiful landscape, right? The hero image, which so many of us are so tuned in to capturing, right? You go out to Glacier Point and you put your tripod down and you stand in that spot and you take the photograph next to somebody else, okay? So how do we manage kind of that situation where you and I absolutely could stand shoulder to shoulder, create the same photograph with the same technology, and create the same powerful image? Well, I think a big part of it is what you're willing to say, how you're willing to articulate your experience there. Why? Well, at the core of kind of telling stories is really trying to share your personal experience. And I think that one of maybe the best takeaways, the little pearl of wisdom, the tiny little nugget that I hope you can leave with here is that you are the author of that story. Now, when you go out and you create something meaningful, create something powerful, create something where you traveled halfway across the world, or who knows, you spent a lot of money to get there, and you go and you have that experience and you just, really were there, you were immersed in it, and you felt the wind hitting the back of your neck and the cold air, and I don't know, who knows, you walked out of that Airbnb and saw the northern lights or whatever it is, right? Well, when you share that, and you simply just attach somebody else's words and say, well, the mountains are calling and I must go. Like, that does you such a disservice, right? You are the author of this experience. So tell me what you felt, right? Tell me what you experienced in that environment. And so as a person who wants to tell meaningful stories, or as a brand, or whatever, this is really, I think, the recipe, what we're looking for, right? We want to know what people can't tell by seeing the image. Now, I think one of the big challenges is that oftentimes we kind of get into this mode where we describe to people what they can already see. We describe the fact that, hey, you're looking at a plane in Alaska flying over a blue lake on a glacier. Like, all that information is super relevant, but it doesn't leave you with anything that was experienced. It doesn't leave you with any of the meat of the story, right? The meat of the story, or the important part of the story, or the relevant part of the story being that the effort that went into getting there, what it was like, what I shot with, what was I feeling in the moment. When you stick your hand out of the plane, what is the vibration on the lens like? How cold was it? All of these details, all of these little anecdotes, this to me really is what needs to be included with the image. This to me is what gives the image life. It's the infusion of your personal DNA. It's the infusion of what you saw, cared about, witnessed. Why were you there, right? And I think that to me is probably one of the more singular important things when it comes to trying to create a story that's bigger maybe than the photograph, right? And there's also a lot of limitations around that as well. I know how challenging that can be to find the words. I remember speaking at a TED conference in Vancouver maybe 6-7 years ago. And right after me was Pico Iyer, incredible author and incredible speaker who had been a travel writer for his whole career. And his talk was beautiful because he really said that the best times in which he gets to reflect upon those trips, upon those experiences, is after. It's the times which he goes home and he sits down and he looks at the images and he processes what he felt and he processes what he saw, because in the moment, we're all just a little shell-shocked. That's how it should be. That's what travel should feel like. It should feel a little overwhelming. It should feel a little nerve-wracking. I remember vividly being young and filtering a very complicated world through my camera lens. First trip I ever did was to Dubai and Yemen and Oman. And I was there for a magazine. I had never traveled before in my life. I didn't own a passport until I went on that trip. I grew up in a single-parent home in California. And the idea of going somewhere outside of where I could drive my car was foreign to me. And in fact, the reason that I picked up a camera in the first place was purely because of the fact that I wanted to get out of that small town. It was never about creativity. It was never about storytelling. It was never about standing up on stage and talking about it. It was about, maybe this could be a tool to get me out of this place, to get out of the 6 o'clock news and the dinner table conversations. And not that there was anything wrong with that, but when you know that there's a much bigger world out there and you don't know anything about it, you have a desire to see, you have a desire to learn. And when you find the tool that can maybe get you there, it's a powerful revelation. So I poured everything I could into that. And I remember vividly going to a handful of these places and feeling that deep sense of overwhelming, right? Where every interaction, instead of trying to jump into some nonverbal communication to get to know these people or learn something, I was just putting the camera up in front of my face, almost as if to make a filter, to separate myself from this person, to create a level of safety, because I didn't know how to process that world. And as time has gone on, I've taken a lot different approach. I remember going to Cuba about 7 years ago. It's prior to the borders being open. And it was a really revelatory experience for me. The reason being is because I really had no skill or had no right going out to shoot and photograph people. And this is always kind of one of the biggest, most challenging things that people will often ask is like, how do you approach photographing people in these environments that you're traveling to? How do you ask for a portrait? How do you make your time to where it doesn't feel like a threat, right? Or you're not pulling out your camera and you're kind of eliciting immediately that response where somebody just wants you to pay them. There's nothing wrong with that, but ultimately you want to foster a more intimate experience, and that's really what I wanted. And I went to Cuba, and I remember very vividly, I've got my big camera strap with the logo on it, and my lenses with my lens hoods and all this stuff. I'm like walking around with like just basically an arsenal of lenses and cameras trying to document everything. And I walked along the Great Ocean Road, and there's this beautiful breakwall there, if you've ever been. And oftentimes people are standing on that breakwall, jumping into the water in the reef, swimming these like very narrow cracks in the reef. And I'm walking there, and I see these kids, and they're all jumping in. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. What a moment. I feel like I'm living inside the pages of National Geographic, right? And I walk up there, and I pull up my camera really quickly, and they immediately stop. And he stops his friend from jumping, and he puts out his hand, and I'm like, oh man. That's a bummer, not because there's anything wrong with paying them for the photograph. Sadly, a lot of images are paid for, but it's about the intimacy and the connection of that experience. It's gone. In that moment, it's vanished. And an earlier, younger version of me would have been like, oh, well, it's this and that and blah, blah, but I had to go back and reflect. And I sat in my hotel room, and I was like, what am I doing wrong? Well, you're creating this threatening experience. You pull out the camera, you make somebody feel like an object, something you want to capture. So how can I slow that down and compose an image? And I remember I took a Sharpie and I blacked out all the logos on my camera. I took my shoestring out and I strung my camera up around my neck. I pulled the smallest camera that I had, just my point and shoot, had it right on my hip, put on some board shorts, and the next morning at 7 a.m., I'm walking on the Great Ocean Road, and I see those kids jumping in the water, same as yesterday. And I cruise up there and I put my bag down, and immediately they're like, stop, no, don't jump. And they ask for some money. And I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm just here to swim. And I just jumped in. 10 minutes go by, 30 minutes go by, 40 minutes go by, we're swimming. I know every single one of their names. They were begging me to shoot photographs. Why? Because the point of the experience was to actually connect. The point of the experience was that when I share a photograph of them, when I take one of those pictures now, I know each one of their names. Because when photography has a time limit to it, and you're pressed for time, and there's an impatience with it, people feel that, especially people, right? It's an important thing to realize. Animals, they feel it too. The patience that some of these people can exude when photographing animals is beautiful. The patience that people can exude when photographing people is incredible, because that's what people take, especially those that cannot speak your language. And so to sit there and swim with them and play in the water and cruise around and have this experience where at the end they were begging me to take pictures, it was the most rewarding thing I can remember. And it's all about being able to slow down and strip down the experience just to what you need. Now, I'll tell you one thing. What's really cool about photography is that this tool, it's not threatening. Everybody knows what it is. Everybody knows what you're doing. When you pull out the big lens and the camera with the red stripe and the blah, 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 and the logos and it feels a bit threatening. And it feels a lot like you're gonna go in and you wanna capture that scene, as opposed to somebody who might be composing an orchestra and compose an image, right? Slowly, methodically. So how do we approach that? That's one of my favorite aspects of photography, is learning how to be present. Because I think, and I know that somewhere in this crowd, somebody's thinking about, yeah, I go to these places and I want to shoot these images, but I also don't want to compromise the experience of being there. How do you exist in that moment while still shooting something meaningful, right? And again, a big part of it is giving time to places. I hate to say it, but sometimes it's the places that you know the best that you're going to create the best work. California, for me, I know the conditions. I know that the offshore winds combined with a big west swell is going to create this beautiful type of landscape, this beautiful, perfect wave, right? So it's my personal experience growing up in that environment that's informed that. So how can you translate to what you know? For me, it's looked a lot like going back to places that were meaningful to me. A long time ago, I kind of realized that trying to just simply fill my passport with stamps is not actually the most rewarding thing. You're arriving in that new country, and you're driving 60 miles an hour while shooting photographs out the window. Everything's amazing. Everything's a blur. It's so beautiful. Wow, I need more caffeine, whatever, right? It's awesome. But day 10, you're passing that same waterfall, and you're like, I've seen it before. No worries. Yeah, click, 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 whatever. And so I think that there's something about the fact that you want to be slightly desensitized, because you want to be able to slow down. You want to be able to pick out the nuances of what makes something interesting. Nowadays, I really try to pride myself on shooting less, but having those moments mean more. I try to simplify my process by looking at some of those elements. You know how I spoke earlier about that idea of creating a 3-dimensional image? The idea of being slightly over your subject or allowing yourself the permission to kind of see what the subject is seeing. Well, it can be the same in a landscape. A landscape can speak to you. When you're shooting surfing, you're shooting waves specifically. There are attributes that make a wave more beautiful, more desirable. As a lifelong surfer and somebody who grew up in the ocean, what I often look for is offshore wind. What does offshore wind do? Well, it grooms the face. It comes from the inland valleys. It's something that anybody who's spent time in the ocean, they know that feeling, that warm wind that comes in the fall. It's like a feeling. And so to capture that in an image, what it does is it relates an emotion. How do we do that? Well, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got when photographing waves or the ocean is to always make sure you capture that offshore wind. How do you do it? In this image right here, you can see it contrasted against that black rock. I'm essentially making the wave into a silhouette to give that same emotion, that same feeling that I would want to do to a subject. So by always shooting slightly above it, I can see the wind contrasting against the ocean. If I'm low, if I'm down on the ground, I'd probably just be seeing it blown out in the sky. I hope that makes sense because I really try to attribute a lot of these types of images to applicable skills that can simply be the difference between sometimes hiking up onto a dune or lowering yourself down, right? It's this idea of looking around and seeing what you have to work with to create a more 3-dimensional image. Now, I remember very vividly, too, being kind of in the Faroe Islands, seeing these landscapes for the first time. This was a trip I did about 8 years ago, and it felt like stepping back in time 200 years. Having been to Iceland, 95 times at this point in my life and living there full time, the Faroes did feel like stepping back in time. There's something really special about that experience, special about going to a place that kind of gives you and forces you to have that pause. And I would say that one thing that was challenging for me is realizing that when you're in a country where not all of the bus schedules, the train schedules, the ferry schedules work on time, and everything is totally at the mercy of the weather, right? That experience also forces us to slow down. That experience also forces us to kind of pay attention to how people live their lives in these different environments and how maybe we can be a little bit more of an observer in that experience. Oftentimes, as I'm shooting and as I'm looking for these moments, it's really about trying to think through it now as if I'm shooting something for a magazine. I always urge people that if you're going to travel and you're wondering how you can make the trip or the experience more interesting from a documentary experience or from a photography experience, give yourself an assignment. Give yourself an assignment. I don't care if it's I'm going to take a picture of every cappuccino I ate on my 8 days in Italy, or I'm going to take a portrait of every chef that I really love the food, or I'm going to shoot a photograph at the same lens length and the same distance of our hotel or the car. It doesn't really matter. The point is that when you kind of objectify your goal in some way, it forces you to hone in. It forces you to think like you're there for a purpose. And oftentimes when I'm shooting, especially on any kind of expedition or personal trip or whatever it is, I'm still thinking about how I can kind of extrapolate images that would be worthy of being laid out in a magazine. Because as I said, every person who's shooting images should at some point play around with making a book. It informs so much about how you shoot. It informs so much about, man, I should have maybe not bullseyed this image. I should have maybe created a little more room for text in the sky. I should have created a little more off-center. I should have. I mean, the amount of times that I think about moments I missed or opportunities that were gone, it keeps me up at night. And so I really urge you to do this. It's something fun to play with. It's something cool to lay out your 7, 8, 9 images from a trip on 3 to 4 pages. If that's all you had to tell your story of that experience, if that's all you had to make a difference as a brand in that place, that's what you have to work with. I mean, that's good advertising, right? Sometimes you only have 1 page and you're trying to make a difference. What does that mean? Who am I speaking to, right? The images that I might curate for a slideshow to my mom and dad back home are much different than probably what I'd curate for people who I know are seeing this and want to potentially go there, want to potentially have that experience. Sometimes it unfolds in mysterious ways, right? In Russia, in Kamchatka, we had this 21-passenger troop carrier vehicle. It became, in some way, immediately an icon for the trip. Now, I want you to realize that this isn't like 200 years ago, okay? Like, there are Honda Accords and Civics there, and there's little crappy cars driven out to the beach, but this is what we were traveling in. And so to kind of hone in on this vehicle, it becomes its own personality, right? And that's the beauty. Sometimes that in and of itself can be a part of your story. What we traveled in, what we ate, who we were with, right? These little elements are critical to the story, right? And ultimately, to kind of exist in that space, you also have to be a part of it, right? And I want to urge people to kind of consider how can you infuse a bit of the memories that last into the image? How can there be something to talk about? I said this a little bit earlier, but really the worst thing that we can do is simply to describe to people in the image what is already there. Now, kind of a barrier of entry for being here right now is you have to be able to have eyes and see. It's what we use on social media. It's how we operate. It's how we take in that information. So what else are we giving people? And if there's a fear around maybe opening your voice or opening your mouth and sharing that experience, I would question why. I would lean into that a little bit. What is it that's holding me back from sharing a bit of my story, or from sharing a bit of my personal experience, or from sharing a bit of that experience that changed your life forever? And I'm not saying that this one changed my life other than giving me some serious hypothermia for a second, but ultimately it was something that was significant, and it's something that jogs a memory, a feeling, right? So images that do that for us, those are the ones that I put kind of at the top. That's what I'm looking for. How can I flip through images on my phone, flip through something on Instagram, show a friend pictures of a trip? The desire at the end of the day should be that they want to ask you about that. If somebody sees something where they want to ask you about it, that's a good sign. So often, we're taking photos of our kids, right? I'm a dad, I know that feeling. And oftentimes I'm there and I'm looking at, people, grabbing their families and pulling them in front of this thing, and then, okay, smile. And they're like, it's like they're going through a cattle guard, like shooting this image because it's got to look perfect. It's got to look perfect. But you know what is not that interesting is swiping through or going to your friend's house and looking at the 100 perfect photos of their kids or whoever smiling. That's just not interesting. What is interesting? It's the moment that they try rotten shark for the first time and the expression on their face. That's interesting. That's the photo where you show it to somebody and they're like, tell me about that. Tell me about that moment, because that's an exciting moment and you're going to have something to say about it, right? It's sometimes not about photographing the perfect, epic, most beautiful sunset you've ever seen. It's actually about turning the camera onto the subject next to you who's witnessing it for the first time. The light on their face might be the perfect shot. So if you're looking to create more of these in-the-moment, authentic images of the people you're traveling with, think about what are they experiencing that they might be experiencing for the first time, right? The first time that somebody tried ice cream. Could you imagine if you could go back and capture that moment? Why? Because it's significant. What we need is we need less smiles, and we need more reactions. We need more expression. We need to capture moments that hopefully encompass the personalities of these people, because that's what's important. And even when I'm shooting a real, bona fide model or talent for a shoot, I'm still looking for those moments. I'm looking for the reactionary moments, because it's that reaction often in myself that is the most exciting. Now, there's a moment when you've traveled quite a bit, and I know most of you guys have, where it kind of becomes challenging to almost feel like you're experiencing these places again for the first time. A little bit of the novelty wears off, a little bit of the excitement wears off, a little bit of the magic wears off. And so it leads you to this place where you're often trying to let others feel that experience, right? I can't express enough how the most gratifying thing I've been able to do in the last 10 years is probably get my kids into a plane to see the rivers over Iceland, to put my wife in the plane to see the rivers, to put my mom in the plane. It's as if I'm just trying to funnel through the people who are most important to me so that they can experience it too. And if there was ever like a marker for something that is correct or right, or that you're doing it good, it's when you hear or you see that subtle gasp, that inhale of breath. Like that to me is the most significant sound in the human language, because it literally means that this person is having an experience that leaves them a little bit speechless, that leaves them feeling like they were able to see through a very thin veil and see something special. And those are the moments I think that we would want to be sharing with others or aspiring to capture if we can. Sometimes a great photograph means that you're actually not seeing or experiencing the thing for yourself, but you're turning the camera on the subjects around you. It can be hard. It can be really hard, but you know what? I know the feeling of sitting there photographing the eclipse, frame number 999, 1,000, 1,001. I'm just keep shooting the same thing because the eclipse is amazing, but I'm looking around and I'm like, the best photographs are people sitting there with their glasses, looking up with their mouths open on the floor. Like, what a special thing. So sometimes it takes chilling out a little bit, relaxing, slowing down, and thinking through what are the moments that are going to humanize this experience. Right? And I think that a really good recipe is when you can kind of combine the human experience with the magic of these landscapes. It's a beautiful thing, right? Because I think that all of us, in some capacity, we want to kind of insert ourselves into that experience. We want to live a little bit of that experience. We want to create experiences that are memorable, right? Storytelling, to me, it's at the core of, I think, everything that we need as a race, right? More sitting around campfires talking about things and less, arguing on the internet. And so the beauty of what we can really bring to life through it is powerful. I want to say I still think there's so much value in that, in long-form conversation, in trying to create images that spark a conversation. One of my favorite things is to go on expedition, come back and share the images from the trip, talk about where we went, talk about what we did, almost creating a virtual map or guide for somebody who might want to go experience it. And at the end of the day, I know full well that nobody is actually going to go out and do that thing, and that's okay. That's not the point. The point is to try to leave people with a desire or a goal that this aspirational thing is actually very tangible, and that whatever that looks like for you, whatever that, circumnavigation of Iceland by bike, or whatever that deep, meaningful journey is for you, you can have it. Because truly, honestly, that the best journeys, usually, they're the internal ones, right? It's like what we find in ourselves after that experience. And as I started this trip, or as I started this conversation, Russia and sitting in a jail cell there was one of those really interesting experiences. It was one of those ones where I had to really slow down. And I think that every trip since that moment has been informed by what I learned there, has been informed by the fact that if you don't slow down the process of going somewhere and you don't think or create some kind of a goal as to what you're hoping to experience, you're going to kind of just be roaming aimlessly. I really like to articulate, even write down at times, if I have a destination in mind, whether I'm offering advice to somebody, whether I'm talking to a brand about their goals, or whether I'm thinking about my own travel and how I want it to manifest, whether it's in photo or video or book or whatever the story might be, I want to think about what is the destination? What is the end goal? What is the feeling I want to leave the viewer with? Right? That this place is wild and scary, or that this place is super approachable and awesome and you need to go experience it. And if you don't see these river systems, then you're missing out, right? I want to leave people with something clear and definitive, because kind of the worst part, I think the worst thing really we can do, again, I can just speak for myself, is going on a trip with no intention. Approaching a story with no intention, approaching a story with no destination in mind. Why? Because there's often a million different routes to get to where we want. But the most direct one, we have to really know where we want to end up. And now I know that there are people out there who probably have the last trip and the trip before that, some photos on the memory card sitting on their camera, and they just, need to get it off the camera and onto the computer. And hey, I've been there too. I know that pain. But I think that one of the beauties is if you're feeling stifled, you're feeling overwhelmed by the process of pulling out that camera, shooting that camera, et cetera, uploading, then make the process more approachable. Make it something where you're going to look forward to doing it. You're going to pull the camera out of your pocket. One of the things I really like to advocate for is, again, the best camera. It really is the one you're willing to pull out. It's not the one buried at the bottom of your bag. It's not that big, heavy professional setup. It's not the one with all the red straps and the lines and the logos and all that. It's really not. It's the one that you're willing to pull out. And honestly, it's that camera that is the least threatening. And by being something that can allow you to be more intimate with the people that you're with the places that you're in, to me, like, that's what I'm searching for. So whatever tool is going to do that, that's the tool I would reach for. And trust me, I know I'm the person who's tried to, help sell 1 million new cameras and the latest and greatest. But at the end of the day, what I really want people to do is go out and create images that feel meaningful. And it doesn't matter the format that that's in. And you guys, I just want to thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing me to chew your ear off for a little bit today. I do want to turn the time over to Q&A because I know there probably are some questions. So please, absolutely anything that you can think of, the time is yours.
We are back here with mics. All you have to do is throw a hand in the air. Let us know you're excited to talk to our illustrious speaker. We've got one over there.
Amazing.
Hi, Chris. I think we've met before, and I'll talk to you offline. My question to you is, what do you use to manage your photos? What is there?
Excellent
a platform? Thank you.
I love that. Yeah. You know what? I'm gonna answer this in 2 different ways, because it's always tricky being at these events, because we have people here who are like, I'm aspiring to be a professional photographer. I want the legit, this is, give me the whole list of what you use. And then some people are like, I just need a better workflow to deal with the images on my phone. So first things first, everything that we edit is edited. And when I mean edited, I mean post-process. Now, just so you know, Chris Burkard has given you permission to edit your images. Digital images need to be post-processed, okay? When you're shooting them, it's like you're picking a film stock. When we used to shoot in California, can I get the slideshow back on too, just so I can click through some images here, if I'm referencing them? If I was shooting in California, I would want Ektachrome because it would pick up the greens. If I was shooting in Tahiti, I'd want Velvia because it would pick up the blues. Point being is that when you're post-processing your images, you are giving it that look. You're creating the style, and you're often shooting in a way that will be informed by how you edit. Now that's like more black belt level, but I just want you to know that it's okay. You need to post-process images, whether they're on your phone or whether they're on your camera. I use Adobe Lightroom. It's a great program, not affiliated with them, but they make a great product. I really like the phone suite. They have a phone app too, and the beauty is you can shoot your phone images in RAW, so you have a ton of data, and you can process them really incredibly. Now, when I'm shooting professionally, this is really important, and I don't want to lose anybody, but I use 2 programs. Photo Mechanic, that is my organizational program, and the reason I use Photo Mechanic is because when you're shooting raw images, or JPEG or whatever, it's really hard to go through them and cull them, meaning delete, edit, select the good ones, in Lightroom. Lightroom is not built for that. The reason is Lightroom is an editing tool, and when you overload it with your 200,000 selects from your trip to Greece, that's not what it's meant for. It's not meant to store your photographs. That's why it has to have libraries and caches and all this stuff, because it's trying to store all of it. So what I do is I use Photo Mechanic. It's purely for organization, and it's so easy. It's so fast. It's so quick. You go through and you're like, boom, 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 boom. I'm just selecting all the best ones, and then I pull the best ones into Lightroom. And that's what I work with to edit. And what you'll find is that Lightroom then is so fast, it's so quick, it's so easy, because it's running at full speed. So that's typically the program that I use. I use those 2 programs if I'm gonna cull my images, meaning make my selects, get rid of my crappy ones, my out of focus ones, and then edit them. You don't need that if you're not shooting a ton. Just use Lightroom. It's all good. You can throw everything in there. You can make, tiered selections, 1, 2, 3, 4, or stars, or whatever you want, right? But those programs, they seem a little overwhelming, but I'm telling you, once you get to use them, they're so liberating. It's so cool to take that photo that you even shot 5 years ago and re-edit it, as the software always keeps improving, and be like, oh my God, this looks so much better. You're denoising it, and you're adding some sharpness, and all of a sudden that photograph that was kind of a throwaway is beautiful. So anyway, great question. That always comes up, and I love it. Next question. There's one out there. I know it. You could feel it.
Don't be shy. This is your chance.
Make James ask a
Greg.
question.
Greg, a photographer, has a
Greg,
question.
bring it. Give me a hard one, Greg.
What does life look like now in a typical year, between how much time you spend shooting for brands, your own personal stuff, and then, all the speaking engagements, different things like that? What does a year look like for you now?
What does a year look like? Full disclosure, I came This morning at 1:30 a.m., I was in the forest in Pacific City, Oregon, shooting a job for the Sphere in Las Vegas. So we were shooting mountain biking, lit up with like 200,000 watts of light in the forest in the middle of the night. I've been shooting on a production for the last week, 7 p.m. to 3:30, 4:30 a.m. every single day. This morning I left the set location on the top of a mountain on a private mountain bike area, hiked down the trail, got in my car, drove to Portland, jumped on the plane, came straight here, I'm speaking, and this afternoon I go straight back to that. So all I'm trying to say is that things are hectic, and I've realized that I am the harbinger of my own demise if I say yes to everything. So I really try to be thoughtful and conscious of like, what do I really want to bring in? Give myself permission to say no sometimes. There's an excellent book that was really informative for my life. It was called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. He's an incredible author, and it's something that I would urge every human being to read because it's really about learning what's essential in your life, giving you a formula to understand what's essential, and to learn that by saying no, you're actually saying yes to what you want. And so the typical year it looks like a mixture of speaking engagements. A lot of times I will be doing an expedition. I'll be touring that film around. I just finished for the last 8-9 months filming or touring The Forgotten Coast, a movie that we just put out on Apple TV. And so I'll have a number of kind of my own things I'm doing, and then usually brand work that informs like quite a bit of my time. It takes up a lot of my time. And then, trying to carve out months or weeks where I'm not doing anything at all. I think that's the hardest time, right? And I realize that some of these projects, some of the things we want to do, they ask a lot of us physically, mentally, the preparation. So I think I've gotten to a pretty good place realizing that if I'm going to compromise a trip because I don't have enough time to give to it, I know what that's going to be. And that's rough because sometimes we want to fit it all in. We want to say yes to everything, but it's not always the best for us. So anyway, yeah, my year looks hectic. And in the best kind of way. I've made it that way. And and it's sometimes it's time to learn to chill a little bit. James, you got something?
So you use there are some images that you have. A lot of images you have are kind of extreme images of action, right? And I know that you approach some of these with an idea of what you want to capture.
Yeah.
Can you describe some of the hardest ones that you've had in your mind? You have this image in your mind, but just getting to the right moment, the right light, the right movement, the right frame. Can you describe something like?
Yeah, I mean, literally the last 4 days have been a masterclass in that, right? You come into this scene where you're looking at a forest, right? And it is you're seeing it at sunset and it looks beautiful, and this looks really interesting, and that looks really interesting, and this tree's cool, and then all of a sudden they light it up and it looks totally different. So all your plans, all your angles, it out the window. Because what they're doing is they're putting these 10K, 5K lights everywhere, and some of them are shining right at you, and some of them are rim lighting this feature, and oh, this is really cool because the moss on this tree is all rim lit, and it's really, and then you go and you find your angle again. And then all of a sudden the athlete comes out and they have a lit up suit with skeleton bones, right? It's a long story. I'm not gonna be able to dive into it, but point being, they're illuminated with a full-blown suit. Their bike is illuminated. It's incredible. I mean, I wish I could have sent some of the images I've been shooting to this thing, but I think I'd be like, I'm under NDA and I'd probably get sued. But anyway, it's crazy because then when they come, everything changes again. So what you're dealing with is you're having to constantly adjust because, oh, it's too bright. Oh man, there's way more light being emitted off of their bike. It felt similar to when I was shooting Under the Northern Lights in Iceland, a film called Under an Arctic Sky, where we were trying to manage this natural phenomenon, the Northern Lights, to be paired perfectly exposure-wise with the wave, right? And what we had to do is a mixture of high ISO images, slower shutter, really wide open lenses, f1.4, f1.2, but when you're doing that, you're dealing with a really challenging focusing situation because it's pure black. So we ended up having to get a 50,000 candle watt flashlight, having someone stand on the beach to emit the light on the face of the wave so we could focus. And so there's always these solutions, right, that kind of happen in the moment. And I think that was like a great precursor to what I'm doing right now, because this is honestly one of the most challenging things. And I think what keeps it challenging but also exciting is that every time every time the person goes, there isn't some perfect exposure. That's the beauty. Photography it really needs to be experimentation. I love it when I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, this is going to be the one. And it's like an arithmetic. I'm like dialing one lever back and then dialing another. I'm putting my ISO up and then my shutter down, or my shutter up, my ISO down. And you're trying to just to find this recipe for what works. And what's unique is that every time they're passing, things change. And so I really love those kind of constantly evolving, the jobs that keep you guessing, the jobs that keep you questioning if you're a professional and if you should even be doing this and why'd they hire you. That's a good feeling. You want to be on your toes. You want to have a little bit of that imposter syndrome, because I feel like it keeps you honest and it keeps you real and it keeps you inspired, because at the end of the day, when you get something, you want to feel like you earned it. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you.